In this video, I'm going to share my thoughts about the different kinds of readers I think will be interested in my new book. It's called When Sex Meets God, a Midlife Unraveling. I'm Dr. Deborah Lukovich, and I'm a depth psychology coach, author of Your Soul is Talking. Are you listening? And host of Dose of Depth podcast. So it's been a 5-year journey to turn my midlife crazy unraveling story and partial reconstruction into a story written as a novel, but it is all real. And I'm pretty sure it's going to entertain, but I also hope it will inspire people to find deeper meaning in their own life experiences. So when I think about ideal readers for my memoir, I think about them as sort of groups or circles, discussion groups. In the back of my book is a whole host of discussion questions that are really good. And so let's get to it. The first type of reader that will be interested in the story is those who have either gone through a midlife unraveling or crisis, or those who love that kind of story of people who, they feel like they're at the top of their game and then something happens and they fall apart and they have to learn about themselves and everything they thought was true wasn't true anymore. And that sort of process of coming out the other end. And one note is a lot of people like to stay away from the word crisis. I love it because crisis really leads to an unleashing of something, an unleashing of it includes the dark night of the soul, and you really are having an identity crisis. And the reason I like that is that it really implies a deeper sense of transformation. So unraveling to me comes after like the climax of the crisis where you can't stand it anymore, and then you have to unravel. And so that's how I think about that. And also, sometimes the clues have been there, but the hero or the heroine doesn't see what they should see. And sometimes they don't answer the first invitation, the call to take the journey. And sometimes they have to be pushed back into a corner again by the universe, or they have to be tricked into it. And then suddenly they can't take it anymore. So in chapter one, which is titled Wheel Broken, is talks about in hindsight, the moment where I think the first clue came that something wasn't quite right. And I call it sort of a twinge of discontent. And I was confused by it because I thought everything was going great. But there was this little twinge, and I couldn't unsee or unknow what I now knew, which was that there was something not quite right in my life. And I had to, after that, the way I dealt with it is I just naturally grew toward yoga, and I learned some meditation, and I was trying to just explore myself. Well, I didn't really answer the call. So 10 years later, that's when it all fell apart. And I had to discover this deep truth about myself that I didn't want to know. So if that's one kind of readers who are into that sort of midlife unraveling crisis story. The next type of reader that will find my book interesting, I think, is generally women who came of age in the 1980s, and men too, but I'll talk about men later. They'll definitely realize or recognize the cultural backdrop of my story. And also, I think younger women will resonate as well, because here we are again, sort of in familiar territory. So the 80s, I came of age in the 80s, and it was a time of great progress for women. I mean, there were record numbers of women being elected to political office. There were, the first women partners of law firms, and, some women were even sitting on boards of corporations. There was also this increased consciousness of domestic violence, which really was experienced through the Lifetime movie network, cable network, which brought those stories to life. There was finally, I don't even think until 1982, when all across the country, it was illegal to rape your partner, whether that was a man or a woman, actually. And the Violence Against Women Act was passed. And even though it wasn't funded, unfortunately, it was passed. So there was pressure on Congress to recognize that there was this issue. And what was interesting is that while there was that progress, there was also this like really deep backlash and that really couched itself in violent rhetoric towards women and their sense of growing independence. So I kind of, and a lot of women, I think, brush that off, but it gets absorbed in you. So another couple of things in movies. Alien. Sigourney Weaver played the first woman protagonist in a science fiction film where she kicked alien ass, just like a man could. And then, of course, there was the movie Thelma and Louise, and the reaction to that was very interesting because, not only did those women blow up a semi truck, and actually male movie reviewers, they didn't like that. But they also, at the end, chose death over oppression because they couldn't see out of the system. So anyway, there was this progress, but there was also this counter backlash, and we're circling back to that right now. In my story, I thought I was living life on my own terms and even getting married. Like my husband and I walked ourselves down the aisle as partners, and I wasn't gonna have my father give me away to my husband. And so when my marriage eventually ended, which is part of my unraveling, these old wounds actually came up to the surface and I had to deal with them. And I didn't even know that I had these wounds. So in chapter 19, which I call setting boundaries, there was a strange dynamic. Once I knew I was getting divorced, I kept being tested when it came to men. Like I would be sitting at a bar and a man would just, come closer. And it wasn't like friendly conversation. It was more like I had this feeling that he was imposing on my personal space, and I had to learn how to sort of like shut that down. And it sounds funny, but I had lived safely in the security of this marriage for 24 years. So for those people who like the Eat, Pray, Love story, either the book or the movie, you're going to like this book as well because it is kind of the same dynamic of a woman who then goes to find, her deeper self. But in my book, there's more focus on the interplay between sexuality and spirituality, where for her, that character, they were kind of separate things. For me, they're intertwined. So I think it makes for a richer story. Uh, Also, another group of women who might like my story are younger women, because here we are again experiencing another backlash towards women's just freedom to be who they are. So the core issues are the same, but women of today, younger women, they are supposed to be able to take for granted that they have the freedom to, determine the fate of their own lives. So they have, more consciousness. And at the same time, here we are again. So I thought of a Netflix series that maybe can help you understand why younger women might be uh, my story might resonate with them. And it's called Nobody Wants This. It stars Kristen Bell and Adam Brody. And the series really does capture this push and pull that women and men probably experience today as they seek relationship experiences that won't undermine their sense of self-determination. So there's several chapters in my book that sort of hit on this. So, and these are funny chapters. When my psyche now pushes me out there, like I didn't really want to get out there. I didn't run into the arms of another man. Instead, I like delved into depth psychology. But then at some point, my unconscious was like, okay, time to get you out there. So in chapter 22, it's called The Dam Breaks. And I'm just studying at the beach at the tiki bar, and a random guy, he just ends up pushing that button and unleashing me sexually. And we end up having an experience, and then he drops off the face of the earth. And I'm like, what? No, now I need more. So then I hit the online dating scene. And in the next several chapters, I talk about experiences where just younger men showed up and they all happen to be the same age, oddly, millennial men, 17 years younger than me. So I was like, what is going on here? But it turned out that they were teachers in a way. They didn't know they were being a teacher, but each encounter brought me into closer relationship with my body and my sexuality. And then I round out that story of online dating experiences with chapter 25 called To the Edge and Back. And I made my most daring move, dipping my toe into the idea of being sexually submissive. So I'll just leave it there for you. Speaking of men, they're another group of readers that will be interested for different reasons. So, half of my endorsements of my book are actually written by men. One or two are millennial in age, and another is a Generation X. One of them found my approach to dating in my 50s to be refreshing because I didn't follow the rules. And another connected with the deeper notion of the masculine and the feminine that's in both men and women. He's a millennial that, was also going through his own sort of midlife experience. And for him, the way that this showed up is that he eventually rejected conventional notions of success, which you could call like a one-sided masculine, in favor of creative expression, which you could say is the feminine. So that's interesting. And also, I told you that my book is written as a novel, but every story is true. And there's a lot of vulnerability, and there's also a lot of eroticism. And one of my millennial author friends said it's slow burn romance, I guess is what it's called. So in chapter 30, A Portal to the Feminine Realm, I begin to connect more deeply with myself through my next relationship after the online dating phase. And I end up again being, this time it's different. I wasn't doing it, I wasn't in control. I was really swept up in romance in a very ironic relationship with another 33-year-old man. And through our experience together, there was less physical sex and sort of more what I call no sex sex. And through that experience, I had a Kundalini experience where I came into deep relationship with what I call the feminine realm. Another group of readers that will be interested in my book are those that are drawn to the intertwining relationship between sexuality and spirituality. And so, spirituality, not necessarily meaning religion, but connection, and also sexuality, more than just this need to be physical. Sexuality, meaning how you're tapping into creativity, creative intelligence, I call it. So, uh, you could say even right now why this is relevant to what's going on in the world is that there's a climaxing of division that really has to do with the ultimate division between the feminine and the masculine, and earth and heaven, and sexuality and spirituality. And that, that division, that one-sided masculine, that, the toxic masculine is not the masculine. The masculine is a healthy masculine. It's a good masculine. And so, this is why you can sort of see this underlying lining theme in my story as something that can help you relate to what's going on in the world. And then also another part of this, the intertwining nature of sexuality and spirituality, is in my story, coming of age in the 1980s meant I had to conform to the masculine notion of the work world. And so many women of my generation have we have very strong masculine consciousness because and we had to leave our feminine at the door. So while many thought women could bring the feminine creativity, relationship orientation, that sort of thing to the workplace, it really didn't end up happening that way unless women went off and created their own sort of companies. And so, that was rejected. So part of my journey was to come back into a healthy relationship with my feminine, which also allowed me to have a healthier relationship with my masculine. So people who are interested in that sort of, intertwining partnership and fluidity between the masculine and the feminine and the different ways it shows up in our personal lives and in the collective will be interested in my story. So in chapter 44, this sort of gets at this. This was during a time when I was still with this first post-divorce relationship, but we didn't have the same access to each other, let's say, that we did before. And we weren't able to be physically intimate. And at the same time, I felt called to re-explore my childhood religion of Christianity, which I had rejected twice already. So it was a little scary that I was exploring it again. But in solitude, while I couldn't be with this man, and during meditation and prayer, I reached a place so deep inside me that I had this shift where I shifted my burden onto something transcendent. You might call it God or the quantum realm or nature. And so as I came into relationship with my depths, that was the bridge to connecting me to something transcendent, which I hadn't really felt before. And it was an arousing experience. So this chapter is called Orgasms from God. So there are a couple of other groups of readers. Another group is readers who are curious about how desire, creativity, and purpose can come alive is one of the things that happens when you go through an unraveling and you come out the other end if you learn the lessons. And there's a movie that my story connects with, and it's called Begin Again. It stars Mark Ruffalo and Keira Knightley. And without telling you too much, I love this movie because it's about how um, sexual energy and arousal, we mostly misunderstand. In many cases, what we're aroused by and what we're attracted to is a part of us that we're seeing in the other, but wants to be expressed from us in partnership with the transcendent. So in this movie, there is a lot of creativity, and Mark Ruffalo, real quick, is sort of a washed up record producer, and he sort of climaxed with CeeLo Green, I guess, in the movie. He was his last big find, and he is falling apart. So he's definitely having an identity crisis, and he wrecks his marriage and his relationship with his daughter. Okay, so he's one part of the story, and Keira Knightley is with somebody she's in love with, which is played by Adam Levine, and she writes songs, but she's sort of like, she's just maybe more introverted. She's very talented, but she's very supportive of Adam Levine, her boyfriend. And he gets discovered and he gets taken out to, I don't know if it's LA or New York. I can't remember which coast it's on. And he actually succumbs to his ego and they end up not being together anymore. So Keira Knightley in her low part runs into Mark Ruffalo and they end up creating something together. But there's moments where they think, is this about romance? And it's not. And the ending is the ending that I love. It doesn't conform to conventional ideas about romance. So if you like that story, you might also like my book for that reason. The other group of readers that will be interested in my book are people who are fascinated by Jungian ideas because my midlife unraveling coincided with this irrational calling to go pursue a master's PhD in this field called depth psychology, which is the study of the unconscious. And Carl Jung, you might have heard of Carl Jung, he's one of the founders of depth psychology. In fact, if you've taken the Myers-Briggs inventory, that all those versions of that are based on Carl Jung's theory of psychological type. So anyway, so my story is full of psychological and symbolic depth, reflecting the journey of individuation, which is another theory of Carl Jung's. And individuation is the journey of being aware that you're coming into relationship with what is in your unconscious. So you're sort of shining a light on your unconscious on purpose, as opposed to a lot of people just end up kind of experiencing things accidentally. So I weave in Jungian ideas like dreams. So at a certain part of my book, my dream life really becomes very dramatic. And working through my dreams through journaling and also writing poetry is weaved into my story. So working with dreams and images is integrated into my story. It's kind of hard to explain, but my story is written in a way that brings these ideas to life without thinking that you're learning academic ideas. It's still written as a novel. And then finally, the last group of readers or sources that could pass my memoir along to clients are therapists and other wellness practitioners because it really does bring the story to life. And there's a whole other field of Jungian psychology and depth psychology called Jungian film theory. So, like dreams are there to offer clues about our journey, our future. Some people are really sensitive to film images, and that was me. So I also work in sort of experiences with some of the films that I saw as many as 8 times that helped me gain insights that couldn't have been gained through just regular talk therapy. So, that is it. That's a lot of different types of readers that might be interested in my book for different reasons. And they all sort of overlap in certain ways, but they all represent different kinds of readers I think will enjoy my stories. So I hope that helps you determine whether you want to buy this book or not. So that's it. Take care. And it's coming in a couple of weeks. Take care. Bye-bye.